Joining me now is Michael Froman, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations and former U.S. Trade Representative. Michael, it's great to see you. Thank you very much for being with us. So Putin seems to be saber-rattling, since the U.S. assessment is that he's not going to carry out a nuclear threat. His nuclear posture was long planned. They just formalized it and announced it this week, especially not in anticipation of a more accommodating American president about to take office in the person of Donald Trump.
I think that's right, Andrea. I think clearly he wanted to do something in response to President Biden's decision to allow ATACMS to be used to target territory within Russia. But he is saber-rattled before, and I think one thing the Ukrainians have done by going into Kursk is to demonstrate that, in fact, you can attack a nuclear power, and they will still be constrained by the pressure of the world not to escalate to use nuclear weapons.
So are his tactics, the fear tactics, though, going to rattle the NATO allies, the Balkan states certainly in NATO, or is it designed to improve his leverage against Ukraine in what is now expected by most people to be a negotiation that's going to take place next year?
I think both sides, both Russia and Ukraine, are using this time to try and create the best possible situation on the ground before, as you alluded to, the upcoming likely negotiations. So Ukraine using the ATACMS and taking action that they can take right now to hold and hold territory within Ukraine and perhaps push the Russians back where possible. Russia trying to make incremental improvements in eastern Ukraine and to repel the Ukrainians from the Kursk region using North Korean troops as well. So there is an escalation, including around attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and all in anticipation of that negotiation. I don't think any of this is fundamentally game-changing. I don't think the ATACMS fundamentally change the situation on the ground, nor do Putin's attacks on Ukraine and the energy infrastructure. There's just will continue to be damage done until both sides can sit down and reach a negotiated solution.
Well, what could be game-changing are 10,000 North Korean troops. Should the U.S. and NATO be concerned about the first introduction of Asian troops on a European battlefield and the degree that Kim Jong-un is helping his ally Putin and replenish his troops? And also, there's a two-way street here. The degree to which Putin is helping Kim Jong-un transform or modernize his missile.
Well, it's exactly right. I mean, the combination of Iran, North Korea, and China coming to the aid of Russia in its attack on Ukraine really demonstrates a new dynamic that links together the Indo-Pacific theater and the European theater when it comes to security. I think in Europe, I just came back from a trip to NATO and to Finland and Poland to focus on NATO enlargement issues. Certainly the Europeans are increasingly viewing China and its actions, as well as North Korea and Iran, as being a security threat to Europe, and that's changing their perspective on how to deal with China going forward. We don't know yet what the North Korean troops really mean for the battlefield, whether they are very good and effective troops or whether they are not. And so we'll have to see what happens when they are, in fact, in combat. The potential, of course, as some have suggested, that the 10,000 is just a down payment on potentially 100,000 troops coming from North Korea, which would allow Putin to avoid having to draft young men from St. Petersburg and Moscow and potentially run into political opposition. That is a very disturbing potential new fact in this conflict. But we have to see how the North Korean troops perform. And in the meantime, I think this is all having the effect of strengthening NATO, strengthening European resolve, and strengthening the transatlantic effort to try and support Ukraine to bring this to a acceptable end.
Well, the acceptable end, though, would be a negotiated end, it seems. Obviously, Volodymyr Zelensky is navigating a very careful balancing act and very aware of what he faces, or what he could potentially face with Donald Trump coming into office. And for the first time, he's actually backed up. There's public polling that, large numbers, a clear majority, plus maybe 2/3 of Ukrainians support a negotiated solution. They are obviously war-weary, and it seems to be that the reality has set in that there's going to have to be some trade-offs.
I think that's right. They are war-weary. They are prepared, it seems like, or they're preparing themselves to accept the fact that they're not going to achieve their territorial objectives at this time through military means alone. And that leaves the fundamental question of what their security situation is going forward. Zelensky and I think Ukrainians would say it has to be NATO membership. Anything short of NATO membership, any other kinds of security guarantees, the Russians will just poke their way through. And when the West is preoccupied elsewhere, will launch a third offensive into Ukraine. I think on the West side, there's discussion of how do we make a set of security guarantees short of NATO membership as muscular and as credible as possible. And that, I think, is where the negotiation will really come down to, because Ukrainians, I think, are highly skeptical given previous security guarantees they've received, including back in 1994 when they gave up their nuclear weapons. And those security guarantees have not, in fact, provided sufficient security for them.